Okay. I had said that we were going to do the next lesson. I was going to do the Old Testament of the Passover, kind of why the Passover, the way they always did it, and why they did the Passover, but I'm not going to. I'm going to do this happened just before the garden, so hopefully I can, I'll figure that out later. This was the Passover feast, and then Jesus went to the garden, because I just videotaped that one, just so you don't get confused. This was the last meal that Jesus had with his disciples. He knew it was going to be the last meal. But the reason that they celebrated the Passover was because in Egypt, and you've probably heard about Moses, and that God's people was slaves in Egypt, and Moses was sent as the deliverer to, hey, Pharaoh, let my people go, and he kept saying no. And there was all these plagues after plagues. There was frogs, and there was flies, and there was the rivers and the waters and the streams turned to blood. There's all these plagues, hail, the animals and the crops died, all these plagues. And the very last one was when the death of the firstborn. So God had said, we talked about faith, means God says it, I don't have to understand it, but I do it because he keeps his word. And God had told them that that the firstborn in every house was going to die unless they had to kill a lamb, put its blood on the doorpost, and then there were other specifics with the meal. They had to eat it a certain way. They had to eat all of it. A lot of things. There's a lot to talk about here with this meal, but the basics of it is, so the people who believed, God said that the death angel is coming and the firstborn in every home is going to die. But he also said that if we put the lamb's blood on the door, the death angel won't enter. He says, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And so those who did that, they put the blood on the door, they went inside, they ate the Passover meal, or they ate this meal. And so the death angel came through the land of Egypt, and when he saw the blood on the door for God's people, whoever put the blood on the door, whoever believed, you know what, this is the real God, this is the real deal, this is really going to happen, because everything that he said was going to happen did. I believe it this time too. So when the death angel came through, and the only thing he was looking for is their blood on the door. Every time he see the blood on the door, he'd pass over that house. And then the next house, no blood on the door, went in, firstborn died. Death angel died. And I am a firstborn, so that would have been me. So that's why, and so every year they celebrated the Passover. They celebrated that God pulled them out of their slavery in Egypt. And they celebrated that the death angel passed over them. Because of the blood. Because when the death angel came and he saw blood on the door, the message that he got, somebody's already died. There's already been a death here. The animal died in their place. There's already been a death here. And he went to the next house. Oh, no death has happened here. And so then the death angel claimed that one. And so anyway, so now this was the feast that they were celebrating. The religious leaders, I still forgot to set my timer. The religious leaders did not want this to happen at this time, but Jesus was in complete control, and he became the Passover lamb. And it connects completely to what had happened so long before during Moses' time. So Jesus and his disciples were going to let me tell you, this is from John 15, verse 12. And in that verse, Jesus had told his disciples, this is my commandment, that you love one another. And this might not say it, but the disciples were used to having the Passover supper. They were used to having this particular celebration. They did it every year. And it happened a certain way. But during this Passover, Jesus changed a lot of things. They had to have been pretty shocked because things were very different. And Jesus was about to bring in the whole New Testament that had all to do with his blood. It had nothing to do with sacrificing animals. It had nothing. Now there's no more of the Old Testament. That's a whole new covenant, a whole new testament, a whole new thing. So Jesus and his disciples were going to Jerusalem for the Passover feast. They needed some place to eat the Passover supper. Jesus called 2 of his disciples. Go into the city of Jerusalem. There you shall see a man carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. He will go into a house. Tell the owner of the house to show you a room where I can eat the Passover supper with my disciples. He will show you a large upstairs room. There you can get everything ready for us. The 2 disciples obeyed. They found everything just as Jesus said. The owner of the house took the disciples to an upstairs room. In the room was a long table. That night, when Jesus and the other disciples came to the room, everything was ready. Nearby was a pitcher of water, a pan, and towels. We'll just set these right there for now. There was towels, and there was pitchers of water. The disciples were glad to see the water and the towels. Since they wore sandals, their feet were dusty from the long walk and needed to be washed. Who would wash their feet? This was to be a special supper, and there should be a servant to wash their feet. Had the 2 disciples forgotten to find someone to do this? The servant who was in charge of washing the feet of both the people, anybody who came in the house, whether they lived there or whether they were a guest, their job was to wash their feet, the people's feet as they came in. It was like the most humble, the lowliest, like you got servant who did this, servant who did that, servant who washed feet. So they saw the water and they saw the towels and they wondered, hey, did they forget something? The disciples looked at each other. Should one of them wash the other's feet? Should one of them do the work of a servant? How wonderful it would have been if one of them had said, Jesus, let me wash yours and everybody's feet. But no one offered to help. They were too proud. They wanted to feel important. Jesus knew what his disciples were thinking. He was sad that Satan had put wrong thoughts in their hearts. Since there was no one to wash their feet, everyone sat down to eat supper. Actually, I've read some things about how it probably maybe wasn't a table like this, that usually when they sat at meals there was a rug on the floor and they would sit with their feet behind them, which is another big reason to wash their feet, because the things that they were stepping in with sandals and then you sit with your feet behind you. Anyway,